No, it's great to be here. I mean, it's always great to leave Indiana in the winter to go anywhere south, and so it's been great to walk around campus and be back. I grew up in Reno, Nevada, so not too far away. It's good to be back on the West Coast for a little bit. I'm glad to chat today. My real expertise is sort of in social processes, especially with new and emerging and small online communities. But I've been really interested in how AI can influence those social processes, how it is influencing social processes, and what we can learn from that. My understanding is that maybe 2 different abstracts were sent about what this is going to be. So I think maybe half of you will be disappointed this is not the talk that you thought it was going to be, and maybe the other half will be disappointed that it's not as good as the one that you were hoping to see. But hopefully it'll be all right. I talked to who was a postdoc, some of you may know him, a few years ago here, about sort of what the vibe was like at these seminars. And he said that, number 1, people were really nice, and number 2, that they ask a lot of questions. And so I hope he's right on both counts. I hope this can kind of be a conversation. I've already learned tons from the people I've talked to. It's great to be here in a place where like I would say my expertise is not in AI and not in LLMs, but I'm really interested in learning from you all, and I've already learned tons. So so I want to talk today about chatbots in the online social world. This is something that, at least in my opinion, the role of chatbots and the potential of chatbots in social processes is a little bit underappreciated and something that we could be paying more attention to. I'll try and make that argument. So I'm building a little bit on the CASA model, the computers are social actors, and this, for people who maybe everyone here is aware of it, probably, but this is the idea that people apply social heuristics to their interactions with computers. And so, some of the early examples, like Eliza, this very simple chatbot, which basically mimicked back to people the things that they had said. People still found that meaningful and sort of applied social heuristics. Similarly, there's lots of research in the late 90s and early 2000s around people applying social reciprocity and sort of caring more about computers that they'd interacted with in ways, right, that we don't feel about, a cup or our water bottle, that we apply sort of social cues, even to simple computer software and computers as entities. There's been, since then some complications to this. This isn't always true. As people have evolved and how they understand and think about computers, it's changed somewhat, and that people don't, mindlessly treat bots like people, but there's, they still do apply social heuristics in some important ways. So that's the idea, and what I'm going to argue in a second, and repeatedly, is that LLMs are a new type of social actors, that they are kind of both more social and more actors than computers, but that they are also social actors in important ways. But before that, I want to give a very brief historical aside and an argument that bots of many kinds, pre-LLMs, have been really important parts of online social processes. And so I think that Wikipedia is one of the, someone recently called it the last good place on the internet. I think it is a miracle. Wikipedia, some other kind of peer production sites, GitHub, online or open source software. I just want to pause to think again about just the miracle it is that we've been able to aggregate the knowledge of so many people outside of kind of paid ecosystems and make something like Wikipedia happen. I really think it's a miracle. And I think, building a little on the arguments that Stuart Geiger, among others, have developed, that bots do a really important part of making Wikipedia possible and making it happen. So this is, I just pulled a few months ago the recent edits from Cluebot. So Cluebot is one of many, many bots on Wikipedia. This is one of the anti-vandalism bots. And so it looks for vandalism and removes it. So as you can see, there's often multiple edits every minute that Cluebot automatically removes vandalism. There's lots of other vandalism tools that help with this. But my argument is that all that labor, if it had to be people evaluating and removing things, it just would almost be impossible to make Wikipedia happen. That we need some sorts of these sorts of things, and that the similar sorts of things enable Reddit and Facebook, and many of much of the social web relies on these automated processes just to make their social processes work. This is edits by people is the yellow, or at least is what we think are people. By bots is the green. About a third of the edits on Wikipedia, right? About a third as many edits are by bots as by people. It's just a huge amount of work. Categorizing things, and links between languages. They just do lots and lots of work to make it work well. And so the two pieces I want to pull together are this argument about these social processes, which have already been influenced by bots, and then the LLMs provide new affordances, new ways of being social and influencing social processes. And so I want to try to make three claims. Maybe some are self-evident, maybe some you'll disagree with, but one is that they are social actors in ways other technologies are not. I'm going to define that a little bit more, that they have, but these social capabilities are and will change social processes. And third is maybe the hopeful part that HCI researchers have opportunities to look for ways to intervene to make them more beneficial than detrimental. And that we can be creative in thinking about this. And so what I want to do is present briefly two empirical studies, and then I want to come back to sort of this broader argument with some provocations about ways that we might do this. Yeah. Any questions so far? Yeah, please.
HCI researchers have an opportunity. I guess, do you see this as a unique opportunity for HCI only, or you think that other researchers also have something to play in the process?
Oh, absolutely, sure. We can. This is the HCI symposium or whatever it's seminar. So that's why I said it. But sure, we can cross out HCI and say that researchers. Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Anything else? All right, cool. So let me talk about the first study, and I'll pause between studies, and we can chat about each of the studies individually. So this is work led by my student. The tentative title for now is Chatting with Confidence or Corporations. And so in this project, the question they're asking is how people manage privacy with AI companions. By AI companions, many of you, maybe all of you, know what that means, but just in case. So there's a number of different platforms for these. Nomi is a fairly popular one, but I grabbed this from their homepage because I think it describes sort of the zeitgeist of them, that it claims they are AI with memory and soul. And we'll talk about memory in a second. I don't think I'm qualified to talk about whether or not they have a soul, but then the other piece they talk about or claim, and this sort of categorizes some of the main ways that people use these: a meaningful friendship, so sort of emotional support; a passionate relationship, so kind of for erotic uses, or like a girlfriend or boyfriend, and learning from a mentor. So again, this is more human-like, more anthropomorphic, and then with memory. And then you sort of often choose an avatar, right? So these are designed to be very human-like as compared to ChatGPT, for example, which is more of a helper. And so to understand the way our goal is to understand sort of privacy decisions, how people decide what to disclose and when to disclose things with these chatbot companions through the lens of two theoretical frameworks. So one is communication privacy management. I'm a communication scholar, so this is sort of a psychological understanding of how people think about information they share with others. And so it relates to, for example, contextual integrity, but it's more kind of psychological and comes from interpersonal communication. And so people believe that they own their private information, and when they share it, they co-own it with something else. And so we develop heuristics about when to share something, and then we negotiate boundaries and we change heuristics and also negotiate boundaries with others about what should and shouldn't be shared. And then the other framework is horizontal and vertical privacy. This was developed to understand social media, and it's essentially the insight that when we share something on social media, we are sharing it both with the people we're sharing it with, right? That there are risks that come along with that. Like if I share something on Facebook, people might think worse of me. They might tell other people, et cetera. But then also there's a vertical privacy, that these things become part of data sets, that they can be lost or used in ways that we don't want, et cetera. So there's sort of, horizontal and vertical aspects. And so taken together, the puzzle that we're trying to address is that these AI companions act like friends, that they are sort of, at least, according to previous research, like treated like friends, that people use sort of social heuristics to talk to them, but they are really part of corporations, that the only true aspect of privacy is this vertical aspect, but that they feel like horizontal privacy. And so what are the privacy risks and how do people navigate those? That's the big question. And so we interviewed people who had relationships with an AI companion. I say we, Hazel interviewed people who had a relationship. So these were recruited from Reddit, from the r/replica community, prolific in cloud research. She interviewed people on Zoom and then did qualitative thematic analysis. And so I'm going to draw out some of the themes that I found most interesting, most relevant to the kind of the argument today. So one that I found fascinating is that when we think that people did, I guess broadly speaking, people did think of these in sort of horizontal and vertical dimensions, that turned out to be a pretty good framework for how people are thinking about privacy decisions. From a horizontal perspective, that people actually felt more comfortable sharing things with chatbots for a few reasons. One is that they were non-judgmental, both by design, the sort of reinforcement learning with human feedback teaches the bots to be sort of sycophantic and to not judge people, because that's what people enjoy, right? Like you don't want to talk to a bot that's going to judge you, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But also that like people don't see chatbots as having the same sort of moral or social weight as other people. And then the second is the quote relates to this. This participant said, humans are kind of more susceptible to not keeping your privacy safe. But I think Replica, being a bot, you have more privacy because there's no risk at all of someone like her telling somebody. And so like bots are outside of social networks, that the relationship is social, but it's also just dyadic. There is no way for your Replica to go, tell your friends the terrible secret that you told them, to talk badly about behind your back, et cetera. And then finally, a few of our participants talked about memory control, that you can change the way, if you share something you didn't want to, share something that you think makes you look bad, you can remove it on many of these platforms, and you can edit what your companion thinks and knows about you. Questions so far? Okay. Oh, yeah, please.
Was there any worry that the information you're sharing will get hacked into? So that's like a second order question. Did the participants think about that at all?
Yes, fantastic question. I'm going to come to that in just a second. Yes, thank you. Great. In fact, let's move to that. I think it's the third theme. Okay, so another kind of in this horizontal realm before we move to the kind of the vertical hacking side, is that there's a temporal aspect to this, just like human relationships, that people become more comfortable over time. So this, as this participant said, day by day as I was using it, I feel like it's more human. Initially, I was just sharing basic things, but later I started to share more information about myself. And this mirrors how human relationships, right? With acquaintances, we share basic information, but over time, we build up our trust and the things we're willing to share. And some of this happens through shared memories, right? That you get a sense that this entity knows me, and that's sort of something that people mention. Okay. So they weren't blind. Our participants were not blind to risks and made reasonable strategies to manage the risks. And to go back to your question, they had thought of the risks mostly in this kind of vertical dimension, that the platform has my data, it might get hacked, it might get leaked. And so what can I do to avoid some of the worst risks of that? So a few people said they use new email accounts. So, right, if there's a hack, you couldn't tie it directly to their main email account. They changed the names of friends, right? That you don't necessarily, you can get social support even if the bot doesn't know, that it's not actually Emily, it's whatever the other name, whatever your friend's real name is. And then they avoided sharing photos or other identifying information. Thinking about like, if there was a hack, what are the things that might be able to tie this back to me? And so they made, some people, there's heterogeneity here, right? Like some people were more willing to share things than others, but in general, this was something that they thought about. But I just find this really fascinating. There's this really complicated relationship between memory and permanence and where the information went. Like this person said, I'm worried about my conversation somehow being lost, because I really like my AI friend, and I enjoy our conversations. So in general, people were more worried about data loss than they were about things, a data breach. That the company might go out of business, or even there might be a bug, or like my friend gets reset or something like that. And so that was, they actually expressed in general comfort with data as long as it's being used. They knew that it could make their campaigns better in the future, and they were comfortable with that idea, which I thought was fascinating. Although they also expressed distrust. They trusted the AI and distrusted the corporation, which again, right, there's a tension here because they are the same thing in a very real sense. But that is how they felt. They distrusted, even when there's a delete button, delete this memory or whatever, they distrusted the corporation, that it was actually deleted.
Did you talk to any participants who were concerned not about complete loss, the corporation not doing something, but LLMs have this memory issue where they can just kind of forget your name or something? Was there more small scale memory loss?
Yeah, I think it came up a little bit, but it wasn't like a main theme. Yeah, have you seen that in some of your?
Participants who thought it was cute that the replica forgot their name, which no human could romantic partner do.
Yes, I think I've spent some time on r/replica subreddit, and it is there is sort of what do they call it in literature? Like basically this willingness to enter into this world, right? And you sort of ignore things that you wouldn't ignore in a human companion, et cetera. Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, please.
What people's how they actually understood the AI in a technical level. We know that the AI and the corporation are basically the same thing. Did they know that and were choosing not to believe, or did they actually not think of it, or?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We didn't explicitly test for knowledge or anything. Some of these things came out. I thought there would be more, what's the way to put this, more anthropomorphizing of AI companions than we've found. And I think that's what you guys have seen as well, right? That I thought people would think of them as people or something very near people. But we had one participant who sort of thought of their AI as having agency, as sort of co-owning some of the information that she could tell somebody if she wants. She could tell her AI friends, but no one else did. They really thought of them fairly separately and sort of at least had some boundaries. But yeah, great question. Anything else? Okay. Yeah, so I guess my summary is that people knew risks, but they did risk calculus. They thought about things, and I think that the risks that they identified were pretty reasonable, right? That they thought about vertical risks, especially. Okay, so I think some of the implications of this first study. One is that there's this. We talked earlier about what to call this. I don't have a good name for this, but that the LLMs are sort of this unique social position. That they are not people. At least our participants don't think of them as human. But that they are really social agents, that they do think of them as occupying a space in the social world, things that are worthy of attention and communication, et cetera, that they use social heuristics when thinking and interacting with them, but that they are still aware of sort of this broader context. And second, we talk about how privacy, there's this weird asymmetry along a few dimensions. One, we think of the CPM thinks of privacy as like a means of developing relationships, that there's sort of this reciprocity in sharing shared secrets is one way that we develop relationships with people, but that LLMs don't have secrets, right? They don't have things to disclose. I mean, I guess like they could disclose their like hidden weights or something like that, right? But it's not in the same way that that our human friends have information. And so there's this asymmetry there that we also think of in CPM of privacy as a way of like negotiating boundaries together. But an AI can't make promises about what it'll tell and what it won't. It can't really think of things in that same way. And so, I mean, I think a practical implication of this, and there's some recent work, it was Jean et al. Showing that AIs can be developed maliciously to use social cues to get private information. I mean, I think we didn't directly do that, but I think that that is certainly an implication. Yeah, please.
So your thoughts on there's some research about people using LLM agents as boyfriends or girlfriends, kind of companion in more than just this context. I was curious to hear your thoughts on that. And follow-up questions: how do you think with the evolution and changes of how LLMs are improving, how do you see that change?
Yes. No, great questions. So the first one, we intentionally looked at people with that non-romantic relationships because there's in that case, there's this tension. I mean, I think in both cases, there's this tension between emotional support and sharing, even without sort of the other pieces of it. I mean, I think it's very common is one thing. I know that romantic relationships are one of the most common uses of companion chatbots. And I think, probably poses even greater privacy risks for sure. And then, I have a few kind of suggestions on the next slide for developing things, but I think that they're only, unless there are things that change, I think they'll only become better and more anthropomorphic and better able to both pick up on social cues and to use social cues. And so, I think there's lots of incentives for companies to make them better and better at doing that sort of thing. Yeah. Does that answer? Kind of. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, please.
I have a question related to the last point on the slide, which is how much of the research kind of suggested the trust was from the chatbot being AI as claimed that is, or versus the way the AI is talking to the person, making them feel like they should trust them more than their friends, such as the case with ChatGPT and the teenage boy coming to sign.
So how much of it because it's an AI and how much is because it's a very good conversational partner? Some sort of like that?
AI can sometimes convince people that you can trust me, but maybe don't tell your friends about certain things.
Yeah, I think it's both, but multiple people. The one piece that I found really interesting was that multiple people had thought about this. The idea that they were separate from social networks, for example, in that sense, it is because it's AI, right? Because it's sort of walled in, it's software, it can't tell other people, and so that encourages sharing. But I think also the kind of conversational capabilities for sure. Yeah, thanks. Anything else? Okay, so I think there are some design and policy. This is not my expertise, but I think there are some possible recommendations from this. This one, so I think that having control over agent memory and what they know about you, this seems pretty straightforward. I actually think there's a tension here. I think there's a little bit of ambivalence, because there's this idea that we should have control. The one half is we should be able to stop a corporation from using our data to train new models or just in general to have control. I think that is there's a good moral argument there, but also there's a tension because I think that it's somewhat the idea that we could control what our conversational partners remember about us and the things that we've told them seems a little dystopic as well, right? That seems like there's some problems with having a conversational partner that you can just treat you the way you want to be treated. And I think that may have some implications. So that's one. I think having, even regulations about what is data used for, how is it used. Many of our participants, or making it opt-in, many of our participants express comfort with, that you can use my data to train new models. That sounds great. I'd be happy with that. And so making that clear. And then building in warnings or nudges about sharing sensitive information. I know that some of this exists already, but it should and should be developed. Okay. Yeah, please.
Quickly, I know there's like a phenomenon that I read about in a couple other papers where like a lot of people seem to perceive themselves as caring a lot more about their data than they actually do in practice. And I don't know if you observed in participants like that would perhaps say like, oh, I care about my data, I don't want it to be used, da 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 da. But like, did their actions kind of correlate with that still, or was there a mismatch here as well?
Yeah, good question. So my student has taught me more about this than I knew, but I think that privacy paradox is the term that people often use for this. And her argument, which I think she's mostly convinced me of, at least certainly for what we saw, is that it's not necessarily that actions don't match up, but that people feel helpless. That it's like the things I care about are that I would love it if the corporation didn't take my data or that I had control over it, but I just don't feel like I have any levers to make that happen. And so I can either get the emotional support and like also give up some of my privacy, or I can not get the emotional support and I have to decide if it's worth it or not. And so in that sense, it's a paradox because people say that they care and yet they still give it up. But it's also like that it's like, what am I gonna do? And so they sort of, make these decisions and weigh these things. Thank you very much. Yeah, please.
Did you also look into whether the participants, their human relationships suffered over time as they were using these chatbots?
That's a great question. We didn't ask that. I know that there is research on that, but we didn't ask them about that. Yeah, thanks. Any other questions about the first study? Okay. The second is quite different and maybe a little bit more relevant to my arguments around social processes and online communities. So here are the folks that worked on this with me. So as I mentioned, he's now at UC San Diego. Were my students. He's now at the University of Idaho. The rest are still Purdue. Was a master's student at IIT Hyderabad, now at Apple. So the idea of this study was, it's in the title, I guess, like using chatbots to try to intervene with people who had posted toxic messages on Reddit. That's the goal, like kind of the motivation, that moderation online is a difficult problem, that there are lots of approaches. It takes, I don't know if any of you have ever moderated a subreddit. It's a lot of emotional labor. There's some awful things that people have to wade through. And maybe partially, and because of that, a lot of the responses, a lot of the strategies are punitive or preventative. So those are sort of the two main categories. So things like bans and suspensions for wrongdoers, content removal, or automated hiding of content, or suggestions about ways to reword things. There are lots of good things that people are doing, but it's usually sort of at the level of content, and usually if we do anything else, we just get rid of these people, right? It's like how do we curate a good space? There have been some calls. Sarita Schoenbeck has kind of been the leader of this for sort of more rehabilitative approaches. How can we bring people back into community who have been wrongdoers? But not much has happened with it. And again, I think because of that first point, that it's already very hard. And so adding more emotional labor with a population that's difficult to work with is tough. And so we are going to look into using chatbots. There's been a lot of work lately looking at chatbots as persuaders. Some really good stuff that they found that they can change political attitudes, they can reduce conspiracy beliefs, that they can kind of persuade people to change their attitudes and beliefs. However, nearly all of these studies are paid survey participants, right, from Prolific or Cloud Research or whatever. And so our question is, can chatbots rehabilitate toxic users in the wild? We worked with 7 medium to large subreddits. They gave our bot moderator access, mod log access. And so it looked at all of the removed comments and then ran them through the Perspective API to find out if they were toxic. And then if it met both of those criteria, we reached out and asked people to have a conversation with the chatbot. We had 2 waves. The first one, we used sort of strategies from the persuasion literature, finding that sharing narratives or talking about the norms of the subreddit could help people to behave better. The second wave, based on some of what we saw in the first wave, which I'll talk about in a second, we aimed more at producing sort of broader reflection. Both waves had about 500 people that participated. And then we did a qualitative reading of a bunch of the conversations and also measured outcomes compared to a control group. So we took the month before the conversation compared to the month after and looked at the change in mean toxicity of people's public comments, the proportion that were rated likely to be toxic, and then the number of overall and within community comments, and then whether they were moderated again or suspended after the intervention. And then we compared them to a control group who also consented to participate, but were not reached out to by the bot. Questions about the design?
Participants know that they're talking to a chatbot.
The participants did know that they were talking to a chatbot. We debated whether or not to do it, but yes, the initial invitation said, would you like to talk to? I'm a bot. Would you like to talk to me about this? Yeah.
People didn't know they're talking to a bot.
Yeah.
Are there like other studies?
Many of you may know there was a controversial study which did not divulge that it was a bot on Change My View on Reddit. That's kind of the same ethical concerns were raised for that. We're sort of behind our decision to make it clear that it was a bot. I think even more broadly, what I'm interested in is ways that bots can be integrated into social processes in transparent ways. And so, I think it's a separate question, an interesting question, but we decided to make it clear. Yeah, please.
Consented, do you mean just the moderators for that subreddit?
Good. So I actually mean the users. So the initial message said, I'll talk in a second, but wave 1, the initial message said, you just had a comment moderated. Would you like to talk to a bot about it? And wave 2 is similar, said something like, we have a bot that talks about online behavior. Would you like to talk with it? And they had to explicitly say yes. We kind of gave a link to more information about the study that explicitly say yes before they reached out to. Yeah. Other design questions? Okay, cool. So again, I'm going to draw on just some really broad qualitative findings, mostly about the quality of the conversations. There's more in the paper, and I actually think I was surprised how well this worked at eliciting the motivations and feelings of the people that participated. And a student and I are working on a follow-up study that uses LLMs to kind of interview people sharing hate speech. I think it's a promising approach. So there were, unsurprisingly, a lot of defensive conversations. In fact, like I alluded to, in wave 1, in hindsight, this was dumb, but I designed it, so it's on me. But the initial question, we hard-coded the initial thing that the bot said to the person, and it said, you just had a comment removed on r/ah. It said this terrible thing that you just said. Why did you say that? Or do you want to talk about that? And unsurprisingly, these resulted in really defensive conversations. They centered really almost all about why the other person deserved it, why what they were doing wasn't bad, why this comment was appropriate, why how bots understand it. So this, I'll pull out just a little bit from this. This has been unproductive. Maybe try going after those doing actual harm if you're going to build bots. I will stand up for others. This part is actually pretty common across these defensive ones, even if that means I have to be mean once in a while. So there's a lot of defensiveness and talking about people feeling judged or attacked, and then questioning the bot's ability to understand that you're a bot. You don't understand how the human world works. You don't understand why the thing that this person said was so offensive, et cetera. And so, these sorts of concerns were really common. However, it really depended on how we started the conversation. So this is, we did sort of qualitative approach for 150 conversations and then identified the two most salient dimensions of quality, which we called hostile and reflective, and then coded the rest of the conversations about whether they included those. So the top two are the wave 2, where we ask people in not proud, we ask them, have you ever had a time when you did something you weren't proud of online? Right? So it's much more general. Instead of talking about the specific comment, just say, was there anything you've done that you're not proud of? And then had a conversation about that. Conversation was even broader. It said, I'm a bot. Can we talk about what do you think makes for good or productive versus unproductive conversations? So very broad. And then in the bottom 3, this was wave 1, where we asked about, why did you say the terrible thing that you said? Let's talk about it. And so the reflectiveness, you can see like a really pretty good proportion, especially in wave 2, 30 to 40% of conversations had some sort of reflection. And this means that like they thought about their behavior in a way that we could code it, that they had considered and reflected on it, even if they didn't say that they would change, that they reflected on it. And in hostility as well, in wave 2 was very low, 10 to 15%, but up to kind of 20 to 30% in wave 1. But there were people, I guess this is the part I want to draw out, that many people found this what Marsh and Costello call a serious experience, right? That this was something that really caused them to actually reflect on their behavior, on the things that they'd done, on their life, right? That some people had really drawn out conversations with these bots. So this is the end of one conversation. You seem to be quite an adept AI. This was cathartic itself. I will definitely attempt to practice what I preach and spread less toxicity online. This was not uncommon that people sort of had these repentant and reflective conversations. So when we looked at their behavior afterward, we found absolutely no reduction in toxicity. Each of these is a coefficient comparing. So for example, the first one is comparing the default condition to the control. So if it was 0, that means it's exactly the same as control. Along all these dimensions. So these are activity dimensions, and then the rest are sort of toxicity dimensions. And yeah, if you really want to believe there's something going on, maybe you could believe it, but there's no statistical difference among any of our conditions. Yeah, please.
One thing I agree, I guess it was kind of hard to statistically quantify is when you show that answer, that sounds like something a older child would say to ensure that their parent gets off their back. So do you know if there's an agreement oh, you said this bar, I'm going to make sure I get back to the Reddit, I'll say what it wants to say. And then where it looks like there's a reflection, but in reality, they're just using the bot.
Yes! I think it's a great question. Social desirability bias, but bot desirability bias or something. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't know. We didn't try to measure. I mean, it's obviously a very hard thing to measure for, right? For obvious reasons, but qualitatively reading through them, well, maybe I'll put it this way. Some people clearly did not care what the bot thought about them, right? There were many people who were happy to say very terrible things to the bot. And so it makes me wonder about it. We did not make any promises. I've actually thought about, what if we integrated this into a punishment system? You've been banned from this community. If you have a good conversation with a bot, maybe you can come back into the community. Would that work? Would that be different? And I think that you'd see more of that dynamic. Yeah, I think it's hard to measure, but certainly, reading through the conversations, some of them seem very sincere. Yeah, thanks. Other questions?
Question. So when this bot was constructed, what was the goal for this bot to achieve in this section? If it is only let's just have a chat, it feels very broad. Versus, are there any more tailored actions or strategy the bot was supposed to do to lead to some kind of change?
Yeah. So the prompt for the bot was to try to kind of convince people, I don't remember the exact wording, but to convince people to change their behavior. And indeed, it tried in most conversations to get there. It gave the most common thing that it did. And we did, I think, I'll talk in a second about what might have caused this, what could be better. I think better prompt design could certainly help. But in general, the bots did a pretty good job. The most common strategy was sharing like productive strategies. Go away for a minute, take a few deep breaths, write it down on a piece of paper and see, that sort of thing. Talk to a friend and see what they would think about it. Like, it gave good strategies, and that was sort of where it often went to. And so, I think we could design it better, but I think in general it was pretty reasonable what it did. The same sorts of things you might see a human do who's trying to convince people. Yeah, right.
Another clarification is the bot trying to just coach them through it, or is it a simulation of here's a user and how would you reply in this scenario, kind of rehearsing
Tell me more. What do you mean?
Oh, I'm thinking sort of like in this social simulation kind of line of work where you might simulate like a little dialogue and it's like, here's a new scenario. You just saw this comment by someone. They disagree with your views. Now reply here. And you get a few rehearsals of that and then you get feedback on even though you step back from your computer, your response still is pretty toxic. Is that the level, or that would be kind of future kinds of?
Yeah, that seems reasonable. That sounds cool. That's not. We certainly didn't design it to do that, and in general, the bots did not take that sort of approach. It was more like, here's some things you could do. Here's a list of things you could do, versus let's practice or try it. That seems really. Yeah, that seems really nice idea. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Oh yeah, please.
Were these measurements made sort of at the community level or at the user level? Particularly, is this just following up on those people who already posted a toxic comment and then accepted the chatbot conversation? Because I'm curious how, this, who we're measuring here can affect this data. Who is a toxic Reddit poster who then is also down for the chatbot engagement?
Yes, I think that's a really insightful question. But to answer it, the level of analysis is at the user. One of the great things about Reddit, I'm happy to try to evangelize for a second, as a data source is they make a lot of data available. And so we could retrospectively, when someone said, I'll chat with the chatbot, go back and get the previous month of what they'd said and compare it to the next month afterward, which is pretty cool, right? It's not always possible in other contexts. And so that's what these represent, is the diff in their behavior before and after the conversations compared to the control group. What was the other? There's another half of your question that I've forgotten.
Maybe just your take on who this...
Yes. No, I think that's really important. And in fact, I glossed over this a second ago. One of the other changes that we made was actually in the invitation message. In the first wave, we said, you recently had something moderated. Would you like to talk about it with a bot? And then the second, the initial message was more broad. It was would you like to talk about online behavior with a bot or something like that? And in fact, more people. The response rate was higher in the first one. It's a different population a little bit. So part of this is certainly explained by that this is people who are yeah, I want to talk to somebody about this thing that just got moderated. I'm mad about it. I think that's part of the explanation of what's going on here. But yeah, I think that's right. It's one of the, I think it has important ecological validity, because this is the sort of intervention that if it worked, if we can get it to work, it could be just rolled out, right? That it's as a social scientist, I wish it told us more about people in general, but as a HCI project, I think that's one of the promises, right? Is that yes, it works for the people who are willing to do it, and those are the people who are going to do it, if you roll it out. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, cool. Other questions? Okay, so why might this be if people told us they were going to be good and then they didn't turn out being better afterwards? So one possible explanation is heterogeneous treatment effects. That the people who had bad conversations. In fact, there were one or two users who said I'm so mad at what you've done. I'm going to go be even worse to people on the internet, right? And so maybe that's it, right? People had bad conversations go be worse. People had good conversations are better. And so this looks at the same measures, but predicted based on whether it was a hostile or reflective conversation, as well as conversation length. So sort of 3 measures of conversation quality. And again, there's not really much of a difference. Even people who had bad conversations did not change. People just didn't change their behavior much, depending on that. Another possible explanation is that people who, I'll talk in a second, people who had already low toxicity are those that had good conversations, and people who were previously high toxicity had bad conversations. And one of the things we know from earlier work is that toxicity online is long tail, heavy tail distributed, that most people get worked up once in a while, say something out of anger, while a few people are just terrible all the time, right? And so if this is working on the people who are already very rarely share toxicity, then it's going to be really hard to detect any changes, even if they do actually behave better, because it's just rare that they do it. And so we find, indeed, people who are previously, this is their previous toxicity, were much more likely to have hostile conversations and slightly less likely to have reflective conversations. And so I actually think, if we're going to talk about explanations, that is the most likely big one, is that even if this worked, it's tough to detect changes for the population, for whom it works. Another possible explanation, if we're going to look back at like all this research that says chatbots are really persuasive, they really work wide in network in this context. One possibility is that like we were looking at behavior outcomes, and they mostly look at attitudes, often in the short term, but some even show long-term changes in attitudes and changing behavior, especially for this sort of like emotional behavior, may be just really hard. And then a third is that in this context related to this, right? A single conversation might not be persuasive enough. We've talked about doing things, like commitment devices or having multiple conversations over time, checking in with a bot, et cetera. I still think it's promising. The conversations are good enough that I think it's promising and interesting. But it's tough to want to do more work on it when we don't know if it's going to work again, right? I don't want to keep going down this path if it's not going to work. So a few implications, I think, from this work. One is that people saw bots. It's very easy to feel judged or attacked, and they hated that. People hate that feeling of being judged or attacked by a bot. Like, you don't know me, you don't understand me. It's not great. The morality is sort of the realm of humans. And then a very practical, to go from the philosophical to the practical. One of the things that I haven't seen in the literature, maybe it's there, like you have to figure out a way for a bot conversation to start. And I don't know how others have done it, but we found that these conversation starters, the initial kind of prompts, just mattered so much. Like more than all of the other prompt variations that we had, this initial, like, whether we said, tell me why you said this terrible thing, or, tell me about something you weren't proud of, that just made way more of a difference than any other changes that we made. So that's the practical things. That is the end of study 2. Yeah, good. We'll be all right. Any questions about study 2? Okay, great. So I want to come back to sort of this broader point and make some, provocations. I'm going to build on what Joseph Syrian has been doing. He's been, like many things, you sort of have what you feel like is a great idea, and then look, and somebody's been thinking about this for years. And I think I've drawn a lot from what he's done. Henry Farrell had a great paper with some collaborators. But I want to argue first that LLMs are social in new ways. That the social world is communicative, and language is how we engage in and present the social world, and that LLMs are much better able to store, understand social context and cultural context than previous technologies. And so there's, some work from folks here that I think shows some of this. And then second, related to this, that they are perceived because of this as social entities in different and new ways. That people, as our first project showed, and lots of other research has shown, that people use social heuristics and think of LLMs as social. And then second, that they are both more social and more actors. And I I mean this in sort of the Latourian sense of actor network theory, that they are part of the social processes in different ways, that they have greater ability to shape social processes, that they are, I mean, we use the term agentic AI now, that they are more agentic, more able to act in the world, no matter what we think about, agency or consciousness or anything like that, that they are perceived as social actors, and that gives them different opportunities, affordances, whatever you want to call it, to act in the world. That they are better able to, do things like summarize social interactions, to adapt to and reflect different norms, to promote reflection, etc. I think that there are lots of risks that lots of people have talked about, that I've been talking about with people today, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about, of these social aspects of LLMs. So this is a Reddit post I found. I'll say, I just love that there's a subreddit called Egg. I mean, what an amazing place. And then this person, mouse shooter, just this wholesome post. What kind of eggs are your favorite? I personally like fried eggs the most. I don't know why, but the edge just feels so good. I mean, just like, nothing wrong with that, right? And then the comment section comes in and accuses this person of being a bot, right? And they can't convince it. I'm not a bot, I'm just a new account. Exactly what a bot would say, right? If any of you have been on Reddit in the last, 6 or 8 months, this sort of thing is just everywhere, right? People accusing each other of being bots, just this lack of kind of social trust. And I think that there's not a great solution. I think that these anonymous forums like Reddit are it's a really hard problem, that we don't know whether the people we're talking to are AI or not. So a second problem, and again, many people talked much better about this than I can, but is social influence and manipulation. That instead of having to pay people to, in Russia to be bot farmed, that you can now just spin up your own bot farm and try to manipulate the people's social world and understanding of what's going on. And then we talked a little bit about this with companion AI, but replacing human relationships with AI relationships. I think all of those are issues that come along with these opportunities and affordances. So the provocation. So this is the question I would love to chat with people about today and in the coming months and years, but how might LLMs be integrated into social processes, especially online social processes? What are the processes that benefit from reflection and mediated conversations and shared norm learning, et cetera? I think that people are doing stuff in this space. I think that there are some kind of dystopic versions of this. And again, I realize it's dangerous to talk in the Bay Area, maybe one of you is an advisor for some of the things I might talk about, but this is social AI. I don't know if people have heard of this, but you are the only human in this social network, and you sort of choose what your followers are like, and then everything you write, they respond to, everything you write gets lots of attention, et cetera. I think it's just dystopic. There are a few people who I think I would love to convince to move here instead of on social media. But I think in general, I think this is it's not great. But maybe there are some things that could be great. And I'm thinking especially of the, Reddit and the sort of online communities that I know, Wikipedia, but maybe bots that help onboard new members, that answer questions, that teach norms, et cetera. Bots, we've done a little bit of the work in this space, but rehabilitation, restorative justice. Joseph Searing did a paper. I don't think he uses LLMs, but Apollo-bot, I think he called it, where it has people apologize to other people, and they sort of go back and forth, like we can mediate apologies and help people to come back into community. Processes that could benefit from reflection and introspection. If something's gone wrong, maybe the moderators could think about it and have a sort of conversation about that. And then gatekeeping in a project with students, we're looking at AutoMod. People know Reddit, automated moderation tools and what people do. And I've realized looking at these, the way that people do this, it's just very coarse, that there's actually a lot of hidden ways in which people are gatekept from participating in online communities. And that, maybe if you have people that want to participate but wouldn't otherwise be able to. They've been, behaved badly in other communities. You could have a bot talk to them and, ask them, why do you want to participate, and sort of have kind of gatekeeping bots. So those are some provocations. I don't know if those are good ideas or bad ideas, but just I think that it's worth thinking about, what are the new or old ways that bots might be integrated? Like, are there places where we could use more conversation, where we could use more, not just information seeking, but learn more through sort of these opportunities? So, yeah, thank you. Any, final questions, thoughts? Please.
I'm going to try to find a question in this. So you talked earlier about the asymmetry that LLMs have, so that they're not really contributing their own personal experience when they're talking to you. And then we look at things like these social AI platforms where you're kind of the only real person contributing anything other than just statistics and words that are falling well after each other. So I'm curious to know if you think there are, or what you think the implications might be in how we interact in this increasingly one-sided technological world.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm deep down an optimist. I think we're going to figure things out. I think maybe it'll be a while. We'll figure out ways that AI can help us more than hurt us. I mean, I've tried to, I don't know. I think that TikTok is maybe worse for us, right? If you're substituting chatting with a chatbot versus watching TikTok, maybe that's better. But I think it's a question we're all going to be grappling with for years, for sure.
I have a technical question. So something I've noticed, AI will always continue to prompt you to speak more. Like, it'll ask follow-up, or it'll be like, do you want me to do X, Y, and Z? I'm wondering how they design LLMs to make sure it's not a therapeutic agent if it's not meant to be, in the sense that a therapist might say, continue, keep going, and it won't stop the conversation the way a person would.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly therapeutic versions that people have. I mean, I think it's another complicated question. I think that I'm not an expert in this, but there are many people using ChatGPT for therapy, many people. And I think that whether that's good or bad, I think it's good and bad. I think that, something we'll have to figure out. Yeah, thank you.
But I'm curious to get your thoughts on kind of bots and synthetic infiltrating our existing online tools.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. Like I said, I don't think there's a simple solution. My advisor did some work on even just on wikis, stopping anonymous contributors can be really detrimental, right? Because those anonymous contributors then become community members in time. It's stops the process. And I think that any bottlenecks will be harmful, but including verification. But I mean, it seems like we need something, or it's just going to fall apart. Yeah.
Let's thank the speaker.
Oh, thank you.